Hello, you're on Purple Spot. I'm George. Welcome to another episode on exploring layers of handling web requests. In today's episode, I will be setting up a simple website that will point to my load balancer as web proxy and handle secure access to my web application. And so if this series and the content of this channel lines up with your interests, hit the subscribe button and join me in this journey of learning by doing. So, let's start coding. And so as usual, I'll make sure that I have the latest changes on my machine by running git pull, and then I'll create a branch for my changes today. TLS, which stands for Transport Layer Security, is a predecessor of SSL, or Secure Socket Layer. It is a construct that allows for secure communication between the web browser and the server, or proxy that enables access to a web application, which in my case is my load balancer. And to make TLS work, I need a certificate attached to my load balancer that will indicate that my website is legit. And for this particular certificate to work properly, I then need to associate this with a domain. And so as the first task, I will set up a hosted zone for my domain. So I'll create a new directory in the root of my repository and call it zones. And then on my terminal, I will cd to this directory and then run my script that creates my Terraform code shells. And now if I expand this new directory on my Explorer, I get a list of Terraform code that I can use to set up my zones module. And because I'm now standing up my infrastructure using TerraGrant, I will create a new directory inside the TerraGrant directory and call it zones. And then I'll create terragrant.htcl file inside this new directory. I will set the bare minimum blocks inside this configuration file and point the source to the zones Terraform module. And now back to my zones Terraform module. The first file that I will update is my backend.tf to set up Terraform Cloud as the place where my state files will be stored. And then on my providers.tf, I will add the default tagging setup. And for the main set of resources, I'll head over to my main.tf. And then I'll start writing up the Terraform code for my hosted zone. I have set up the name of my hosted zone to a variable reference. So I need to go to my variables.tf and define this variable. I'm not setting default value for this variable to render it as a required input. And so I need to go to my TerraGrant configuration file for my zones and add this as an input. I want to output the hosted zone ID so I can use it on other Terraform modules that need this value later on. So on my outputs.tf for my zones module, I will add this code. My domain, which is pablospot.ga, is registered with Freenom, which provides free domains. Unfortunately, there's no Terraform provider for them that I know of, and so I will need to associate my AWS hosted zones to this registrar manually. And to do this, I need to know the name server entries that I need to associate to my registrar. So I'll update my outputs.tf and add the name server properties of my hosted zone. Because of the manual step of updating my registrar with the name servers, I need to stand up this zone infrastructure first before doing anything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my terminal and export my AWS credentials as well as my Terraform workspace. And then cd to TerraGrant zones directory and run the TerraGrant commands only for the zones Terraform module. So I'm going to start with TerraGrant init. TerraGrant init failed. And if I expand this terminal, the console log is telling me that the workspace does not exist. And so I'm going to create that. And I'm going to use my custom script that creates my Terraform workspace and sets the execution mode to local. But before I do that, I need to export an environment variable called tf module path, which will be a relative path to my zones Terraform module. And then I'm going to start running my custom script. I'll put a link to this script on the description below for your reference. And with that all set, I'm going to run TerraGrant apply to stand up only my zones module. And I will type yes on this prompt. And now that I have the list of name servers, I need to switch to my browser and plug these entries into my domain registrar. And now that my name servers are set, I'll switch back to my VS Code. And then I'll verify that my name servers have taken effect by running this command. I'm getting the set of name servers that I'm expecting, so it all looks good so far. The next resource that I need to set up is the actual certificate to be used for my TLS setup. So let me close my terminal. Back to the main.tf of my zones Terraform module. I'll start writing the Terraform code for my certificate resource. In this resource block, I have set the domain name property to use the same domain name I have set for my hosted zone. And I've also set a wildcard value on my subject alternative names, which should cover any subdomains that I attach to my main domain. I can then start creating resources that will validate and associate my certificates with my hosted zone. So what I've done in here is pull out the domain validation options that's associated to my AWS ACM certificate resource, excluding the wildcard alternative name. And then the parameters such as validation type, name, and record value will be used to set up the records in my hosted zone. And then for the zone ID property, I simply need to set this to point to my hosted zone resource. And now I need to set up the resource that will do the actual validation of my certificate. The certificate ARN property needs to point to my certificate ARN, and the validation record FQDNs will need to point to a list of URLs that point to the hosted zone records, which is the resource I created before. So what I need to do is loop through each element of the certificate records and extract the record FQDN property from each element. So this is how I'm going to do it. And lastly, I need to extract the ARN of my AWS certificate to be able to use this in my load balancer Terraform module. I'll update my outputs.tf and add reference to this ARN. And now that both my domain and TLS certificate resources are set up, I can then start updating my load balancer resources. So first thing I'll do is open the main.tf on my load balancer Terraform module. And I will make changes to my load balancer listener, which is right here. Instead of using port forwarding on my load balancer, I will change this to enable only HTTPS as an inbound protocol. So I removed the for each property on this block, which means I will now have only one load balancer listener. So let me update the properties on this resource, starting with the certificate ARN. So I'm setting the certificate ARN property based on a value from a variable. So I need to go and define this variable in my variables.tf. So this is a required input to my load balancer Terraform module. So I need to go and update my load balancer Terragrant configuration file and add this as a new input variable. I need to get this value from the output of my zones Terraform module. So I need to add a new dependency block inside my configuration file. The config property points to where the zone's Terragrant configuration file is. And I also added a block to mock the value of the certificate ARN. And now I can update the certificate ARN input to point to this dependency. And now let me go back to my load balancer's main.tf and see if there are any other properties that I need to update on my listener. I also need to update the default action to forward the request to my Nginx web application by default. I have a target group resource that points to this, which is using port 8080 as key. So all I need to do is change the reference from each key to 8080. Like I mentioned earlier, I no longer need my load balancer to handle port forwarding. So this means I need to update my firewall resource and enable only port 443. So I'll head to my security group resource and then update my ingress block to allow only port 443. In the previous episode, I accessed my web applications using a load balancer DNS. This value changes every time I recreate my infrastructure. And so I need to set up a fixed URL endpoint that will allow me to access my web application. And so I'll create a record in my hosted zone to enable this. And so at the end of my main.tf, on this new resource block, I will use a variable to assign the value of the zone ID. And this means I need to define this inside my variables.tf. And then back to my main.tf. I also want my name property to be using a variable value. And then I'm going to head back to my variables.tf and define this variable. Because I now have two required inputs to my load balancer Terraform module, I'll head over to my load balancer Terragrant configuration file to set these two variables. I already have a dependency for zones Terraform module, and I know that this is where the hosted zone ID will come from. So all I have to do is set this up like this. As for the record name variable, I'll set the value to main. This means my web application will be accessible via main.pablospot.ga. Now back to my load balancer main.tf. For the alias block property, I need to point this to my load balancer. The name property will need to point to my load balancer DNS name, and the zone ID will need to point to the zone ID property of my load balancer. So let me go ahead and update that. And if I go to the outputs.tf of my load balancer Terraform module, I no longer need this block, so I can go ahead and delete it. And now I'm all set to stand up all my infrastructure resources. So let me open my terminal and then export my AWS credentials as well as my Terraform workspace. And then I need to make sure that I'm inside Terragrant directory. And now I'm going to run apply on all my Terraform modules. And I key in yes on this prompt. So all my infrastructure is up. Now if I switch to my browser and then attempt to access main.pablospot.ga on port 443, the page loads my default Nginx web application. Notice that my URL gets translated automatically into HTTPS and the 443 at the end disappears. This is because adding 443 at the end of the URL is the same as accessing the URL with HTTPS in front. And because my load balancer is now just forwarding web requests on port 443, accessing ports 8080, 8081, and 8082 will no longer work. I will look into this in the next episode and reinstate access to all the other web applications. I've covered a lot on this episode, so if you stayed with me all the way to the end, give yourself a pat on the back. On the next episode, I will show the necessary changes to reinstate access to all my web applications using one load balancer, so stay tuned. In the meantime, let me know your thoughts in the comments below and send me some likes if you find it useful. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you like my content and help me spread the word about this channel. Until next time, keep learning and stay safe.